One, we're recording. All right, let's finish chapter 2. Let me find it. Okay, so again, we're talking about how we mature, how we develop over time, over our lifespan. And so in this chapter, we are discussing the genetic influences, and then eventually we're going to be discussing the genetic environment, the gene environment interaction. We left off on talking about X-linked uh, traits or inheritance. And when something goes wrong, it affects males more because they only have one copy of an X from the mom, and there's no backup to compensate for it. All right, so this is just a visual of what that is. Okay, mutations, genetic mutations are sudden, permanent change in a DNA segment. Okay, so it's going to be a gene. This can occur spontaneously or caused by hazardous environmental agents. Polygenic, poly meaning many, genic meaning genes. Polygenic inheritance is where many genes affect a characteristic in question. So it affects characteristics that vary among people like height, weight, intelligence, personality. There's no one personality gene, no one intelligence gene, and so on and so forth. In fact, the great majority of things that make us who we are polygenic. There are very few things that are single gene uh, a singular gene that's responsible. Chromosomal abnormalities, Down syndrome, are results when the 21st chromosome pair fails to separate, right? So it's also known as trisomy 21. Um, there are sex chromosome anomalies that are caused by problems with the X or the Y, but these are not often recognized until adolescence. So what this is showing you, this illustration, this graph, whatever you want to call it, is it showing you uh, in terms of the maternal age by year and the incidence of chromosomal abnormalities and Down syndrome as the mother ages, meaning the increased odds or likelihood you see as the mother ages, the increased odds of giving birth to a child with Down syndrome or any chromosomal abnormality increases significantly. We say that 35 is where it really starts to make a larger impact. Now, this is giving a lot of responsibility to the mother. And what you need to know is that it is not just the mother, it is also the father. For what I mean is, there is an equal chance that if the father's older than 35, it has just as much of an impact or as just high of odds because our um, gametes uh, have lower quality. They're just of lower quality. They're not as um, I don't want to say strong, but not as durable to things. They're more prone to mutations. So when making the babies, we have reproductive choices. Uh, we could seek genetic counseling. We could use reproductive technologies. Then we're going to talk about once you are pregnant, we have prenatal diagnoses um, and different fetal medicines. And then lastly, adoption. So, genetic counseling. This helps couples assess the risk of hereditary disorders and helps them choose the best course of action. So, who seeks genetic counseling? Couples who have difficulties bearing children, couples who know they have genetic problems or they're at least at risk of them. And then if the mother is over 35. Again, I know the slides don't say it, but the father has just as much of an influence. A lot of focus on the mother. And that's unfortunate, but the only reason why that was primarily was because people didn't know. People didn't know that the father could just as likely be the cause of a genetic abnormality or chromosomal abnormality. They attributed it to the mother because the mother was carrying the child, so they thought, oh well, then you were the one. Yes, I know it's wrong. The pros and cons of reproductive technology. Um, Donor insemination, right? Not just artificial insemination from the parent father, but donor insemination. In vitro fertilization. Um, so you're uh, um, putting fertilized eggs, placing fertilized eggs. Surrogate motherhood, where another woman cares for you. Um, what are some ethical concerns? Well, postmenopausal childbearing is an issue, um, because if you're trying to have a baby after you've hit menopause, that means your body's not no longer set up for it. You could get a donor egg and have yourself in vitro fertilized and have the zygote or the whatever the germ cells implanted into your uterine wall, but your body doesn't operate the same. We have some other ethical concerns. Uh, the selection of desired characteristics like designer babies. Oh, I want a blue-eyed, or I want a 6'5", or I want a so on and so forth. And then there's the exploitation of financially needy women. So if you think about like surrogate motherhood, some women make quite a good chunk, upwards of $25,000 for a surrogate mother. So some prenatal diagnostic methods: amniocentesis. They're testing the fluid in the amniotic sac, looking for genetic abnormalities. Chorionic villus sampling. Now they're actually going and taking a very small chunk out of the placenta. Fetoscopy. They're going to make a small incision in the abdomen and put a little camera down there into the uterus. Ultrasound, an ultrasound. Maternal blood analysis, drawing blood. That's regular. So are the ultrasounds. Ultra fast magnetic resonance imaging. So essentially, what that is they can use MRIs to see how, like, which will give you a better picture than say an ultrasound. But they do it in like quick shots, and they focus on just quick region, like specific regions of like the brain, for example. They don't want to expose the fetus to long amounts or great amounts of um, activity from the magnets. Uh, Pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. So before they're implanting, before they're placing fertilized eggs into the mother's womb, they can gather genetic information from it prior. Let's see. So we fetal medicine, we can administer drugs directly to the fetus through something that the mother takes, or bypass the mother and go right to the fetus. Um, there's surgery. There is blood transfusions, bone marrow transplants. Now, these are all in the womb. Of course, the risks are that there are complications, and most commonly, it's going to be premature labor or even miscarriage. So, genetic engineering, the purpose is to correct hereditary defects. So, as a result of the Human Genome Project, where they mapped the sequence of all human DNA base pairs, not all variants or variations of those base pairs, but just knowing these are the number of base pairs we have. These are the numbers. These are the number of uh, possibilities. Working on identifying all genes and their functions, and of course, this has resulted in new treatments like gene therapies, and proteomics is looking at what the gene's protein synthesis, what proteins it synthesizes. Adoption. Now, adoptees have more learning and emotional difficulties. What are some possible causes? Genetic predispositions, stress of the biological mother, a history of conflict ridden family relationships. The adoptive parents and the children are less alike. So, with sensitive parenting, most adoptees fare well. These are the ones who are adopted. often, no, let me take that back. Sometimes a woman will get pregnant, find out the child has some sort of genetic abnormality, chromosomal abnormality, Down syndrome, something like that. And rather than abort, because for whatever reason, it could be late in the term and that's when they found out, or they don't believe in, something, they're pro-life or whatever, they'll opt to adopt their child to another family that is willing and able. So now the environmental contexts for development, uh, there are going to be family influences, socioeconomic status influences, poverty or affluence, which is the opposite, enriched, neighborhood influences, school influences, and of course, culture affects everything. So some family influences on development, they could be direct, where you have the like your parent or a sibling or a spouse. Those are direct two-person relationships that have an influence on our development. Indirect are third parties. Um, for example, healthy marriage fosters effective co-parenting. So what it's saying is that the parents themselves are co-parenting well, but they're also acting as models if they have, a healthy marriage or a stable relationship. So it's indirect modeling. Adapting to let somebody in. Adapting to changes within and outside the family, like a birth of another baby or that sort of thing. Moving. Socioeconomic status. Um, so the socioeconomic status combines three variables: um, the years of education, the prestige of one's job and the skill it requires, and lastly, income. The first two are social measures, and the last one are is an economic measure. So it's socioeconomic status. So I might ask you, like, what are the three components to socioeconomic status? Education, prestige of the job, and then income. It's These are linked to the timing of marriage and parenthood. Typically, we get married later and have children later. It's linked to the family size. Typically, they are smaller in number. It's linked to child rearing values and expectations, uh, communication and discipline styles. Typically, with education comes not even typically, pretty much it should be guaranteed, but better quality communication, um, more appropriate disciplining styles. So not this authoritarian style. We're gonna learn about this later, but authoritative, where there's a warm bond between the caregiver and the offspring or the child or children even. But there's also discipline, like appropriate discipline. It's linked to the parents' education and economic security. It's linked to the children's cognitive and social development. So, what do I want you to take from it? What can you take from this? Stay in school, man. Get a degree. Have a happy, life. Have happy, healthy children. Education is correlated with all of those things. All of those things. Because if you don't have it now, you're definitely increasing it just by being here. You're increasing the odds that you'll meet the one. Poverty. So now we're going into the poverty affluence realm. 21% of children in the US live in poverty. Rates are higher for children who have parents under the age of 25, higher for ethnic minorities, and higher for single mothers. What are some risks associated with poverty? Lifelong poor physical health, poor cognitive development and academic achievement, mental illness, impulsivity, aggression, antisocial behavior, and hostile family interactions. Again, we know education is correlated with um, um, income. And so here we're talking about specifically income. So again, education is the key. I was talking to my daughter the other day, and she was asking about, why there's so much hate in the world. She said, "Where does it come from? Why do people not like?" She's my 15-year-old. Well, going to be 15. She's always been real like intuitive and conscientious, and she asks really difficult questions. She almost always has, as soon as she could talk. And I said, the only way to make things better is to educate them. People need to know these things exist, not just that they're wrong. They'll figure that out on their own. It should be told, of course, but people need to be educated. And part of that education is simply working together toward a common goal. The number one thing that seems to lower racial inequality or sex inequalities, gender, sexual orientation, religious, you name it, whatever demographic you're referencing, something that seems to lower hostility and aggression or even just negative judgments toward the other is going it that's been proven in study after study is when people are given the opportunity to work together. Oh, speaking of which, the who was it? The Chiefs and the Buccaneers went to the Super Bowl, and I forget which team it was, but there was an article that I read that said, you know, in the team's success in part was due to the diversity of their management, of their coaching staff. They had uh, racial minorities, they had sex minorities, they had sexual orientation minority. They had just across the thing. I mean, in social psychology, we discuss how businesses who have more diversity in their employees have a like way, 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 way significant higher uh, sales revenue. And what could be the cause of that, right? So let's say instead of like, let's say you're selling shoes, right? That's you're a shoe producer. What is the benefit of making sure that you have, you know, black men, white men, black women, Chinese Americans, or whatever, right? Gay, straight, old, young, Muslim, Christian. What's the benefit of having all of those employees?
Your customers are going to be more likely to want to do business with you because more different types of people in society will be able to relate to your staff and see like say like I'm a person of color and I'm more likely to shop somewhere where I see somebody who looks like me, knows my culture, stuff like that.
Okay,
Like representation.
you are not wrong, Heather. Of course you're right. You actually, I don't think you could be wrong in stating that because that's your experience. But let's say you didn't know. Let's say it wasn't advertised who their employees were. Because this study wasn't about like, oh, we have, you know, so many white people, so many older people, so many women. Let's say you didn't know. Their product still, the revenue, the sales goes through the roof in comparison to others. Why?
The product is going to represent your wants more because people who are like you are also involved in making the product.
That's the answer. Because their contribution to the quality and the kind of product, exactly, right? Different cultures have different um, tastes, different practices, right? So one culture might just think of like let's say you have like an Italian base in your employees. What people who are Italian, let's say they're proud of their heritage, Italian Americans, right? So maybe they develop a shoe that's got red, green, and white. And they're like, oh, I'm into that, right? That's cool. I like those colors. That right there alone, right? Just that subtle influence that they have on the product increases their sales revenue because they're able to capture more. But a little, Heather, you're absolutely right as well. Of course you are. If you know, but that's if you know. If you don't know, then there's another reason for it. So you would think, well, poverty's bad and affluence is good. Not necessarily, right? Being wealthy isn't now always a good thing. So, what are some risks associated with having wealthy parents? Poor academic achievement, alcohol and substance abuse, delinquency, anxiety, depression. The parents are often unavailable. They lack emotional closeness and supervision. And the parents might make excessive demands for achievement, right? You got a mother who's a surgeon, and a father who's a whatever, a lawyer, whatever. They might have like a higher threshold of, of achievement than, a mother who's a teacher and a father who's a, I don't know, teacher or whatever, right? Truck driver or something, you know, different expectations. So this is something you should put away and remember. Try to tell somebody you know, somebody you love, this little fact that by simply eating dinner with your children, it lowers their odds of anxiety and depression, delinquency and substance abuse, and the odds of having poor school grades. So simply eating dinner with your children impacts those things. Those who
What?
do not have more anxiety and depression. They more delinquent, more substance abuse, lower school grades. So I have this thing where I don't eat until like right before I go to bed because if I eat, I just fall asleep. I'm like a lizard. It's weird. I cannot eat and then stay awake. No, I know I should have checked out, but it's been like this for years. But anyway, so when my kids eat, they all eat together, right? And my wife and my wife, I'm not saying it's right, and I don't care, right? We share a lot of chores, but my wife is an excellent cook, so she always makes dinner. She's just sorry, she was cursed with the good ability to cook. But anyway, so so she will make the children dinner, and the kids will sit at the table, and she and I will walk around them, talk to them, sit down with them, um, joke with them, just carry on about the night, and or we'll sit in the living room where we can see them directly into the dining room and talk to them and whatever, whatever. So what I'm saying is, would it be best if we were right there with them every night? Absolutely. But if you just plop a plate in front of a kid and then walk away, that's not really doing it. But if you're just interacting every now and again, if you're just checking in, that that's better than nothing, right? And understandably, for the record, there will be times when, you know, your children are a certain age and you may have to go to a night shift. So you just plop in the dinner down, you're like, I gotta go, right? So it's not always, possible to do those things, understandably. Your neighborhood has an impact on our development. Often, or I'm sorry, the neighborhood will offer resources and social ties that promote development, right? Resources like playground, resources like a library, resources like, something that that people would gather together and spend time together. Um, it has a greater impact on the economically disadvantaged. Okay, got it. Thank you, Kristen. Oh, I forgot to take attendance. We'll do that after, don't we? So we have in-school and after-school programs for low-income children, and when those are offered, they show improvement in academics, social adjustments, family functioning, and even child rearing in the future. These in-school, after-school programs for low-income children are very important. Now, our schools, complex social systems that affect many aspects of our development. I mean, think about when you were in, fourth grade, how complex that was, meaning your relationship with your friends versus your relationship with the rest of the class versus your relationship with your teacher versus your relationship with the principal versus your relationship with the grade. right? So there's these microsystems that become macro, more macro, more macro. The farther and farther they get from our interest or time spent with them. Achieving well in elementary and secondary school is crucial to success in college. Man, that is a tough one. That is a tough one. Because some of us here didn't do that well in grade school or high school, right? And it's not even the grades we earned that are crucial. It's the studying habits. It's the self-regulation. It's the uh, attention to task, and focus, which are correlated with improved grades. So one thing feeds the next. So doing well in grade school or high school, that doesn't mean that if you didn't, you will do well in college. Of course not. And it doesn't mean that if you did do well in grade and high school, that you will do well in college. It's just correlated. Let's see. Children in low socioeconomic status neighborhoods are likely to experience poor quality education. Makes sense because if you are in a neighborhood that is low in socioeconomic status, means that school taxes, they can only charge so much, where people can still afford to live there. So if the school taxes are going to be lower, then as a result, that means the quality of the school and the stuff like that, the quality of the resources is also going to decline. Interventions to upgrade best begun early. So if there's going to be an intervention, in the sense of educational resources and programs, it's best that it's initiated early on in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. By the time you reach seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th grade, it's almost too late, right? So you got to give them the habit early. And of course, parental involvement aids academic achievement. Now, our culture shapes all aspects of our daily life. The US culture emphasizes independence, self reliance, and family privacy. Subcultures within the US have beliefs and customs that differ from the larger culture. For example, ethnic minority groups and their cooperative family structures foster resilience and enhance child rearing. One of the things that we're going to learn in this class is that um, um, African American families, African Americans, are more resilient to mental disorders. And a lot of that has to do with social support. So chalk one up. The African American extended family. The benefits of the African American extended family reduces stress of poverty and single parenthood. Family members help with child rearing. So what we see when it comes to parenthood, um, a lot of the research that shows like negative data are done in they're conducted in large cities. So you will see, like, for example, in the human sexuality class, we discuss that it's 70 some percent of all African American newborns, it's 70 some percent, are born to unwed mothers. I want to say it's like 78, 79, like it's pushing 80. And that could be like alarming. Like, well, wait, what's the deal with that? And it's all these studies were conducted in heavily populated areas. They're not looking in Plattsburgh. They're not looking in Rochester, New York, even. They're talking about like New York City. They're talking about like Chicago. They're talking like massive cities. Let's see. Uh, Family members will help with child rearing. Adolescent mothers are more likely to complete high school and get a job. Um, Again, more benefits of the African American extended family: improves the children's school performance and social skills, strengthens family bonds, and will result in a transmission of culture and heritage. Any comments? No? Right. Okay, so culture again, when we look at like the bigger part of culture, we have collectivistic values and we have individualistic values. And so collectivism you'll see are in typically in Eastern cultures, the Asian cultures, the Middle Eastern cultures, um, where they stress group goals over individual goals. They value interdependent, meaning they rely on each other, interdependence, right? I do for you, you do for me, and I work with you, and you work with me. Uh, so they value interdependent qualities like responsibility to others, social harmony, collaborative endeavors. This is why the pandemic stinks in the United States because we are not collectivistic, we are individualistic. Can't take my rights away. Can't tell me to wear a mask. Can't tell me I need a vaccine. Can't tell me I have to, right? Me, my. I'm not worried about my neighbors. I'm not worried about whatever, right? Until it's too late. My gam gam. Oh no, too late. But collectivistic cultures, this is why the numbers of the pandemic in like China, North Korea, Japan, like their numbers immediately went like that because they were collectivistic, their values. They all wore masks out of respect for each other. They would basically they went into house arrest. They basically said nobody goes anywhere for like 2 weeks. Stock up because you're not going anywhere. And they did. They did it. They very rarely left their homes. And as a result, they went down because and they didn't mind because they knew it was for the better it was for the betterment of the whole versus individualism, concerned with own personal needs. They value independence, personal achievement, exploration, and choice, having choice in our relationships. Now, I'm not saying that the individualistic culture is bad. I'm not saying that the collectivistic culture is good, but there are pros and cons to each. Like one of the things that we'll learn in this class is that we'll have different disorders associated with collectivistic cultures than the individualistic ones. Specifically, you'll see children in collectivistic cultures have more anxiety and depression issues, uh, self-worth issues, right? Where you see less of that here. So we're kind of resilient in the beginning. U.S. public policy shortcomings, children and youth, uh, the lack of affordable health insurance and quality childcare. Uh, let's see, there's weak enforcement of child support payments. Uh, we have high school dropout rates are high. Again, these are where U.S. public policy is failing. Um, for older adults, we have limited funding for social services. Social Security minimum is below the poverty line. And we know that advocacy groups and research help improve um, policy development and implementation and maintenance and all that. So this is what we're not doing so well with in the U.S. Especially childcare. Childcare seems to be a big issue. Behavioral genetics explores the nature and nurture contributions to traits and abilities. They look at complex polygenic, right, multiple genes, polygenic traits like intelligence and personality. They want to know. They want to know what the link is between our genetic makeup and its contribution to our behavior, essentially. So now the gene environment interaction. Individuals respond differently to the same environment because we have different genetic makeups. Similar responses can result from different gene environment combinations. For example, children with different environmental enrichment produce the same intelligence test scores. You could have high a high predisposition towards a higher intelligence in an impoverished environment, and the child will score pretty good, pretty well. And then you could have a child with a predisposition to develop a low intelligence in an enriched environment, and they would score pretty good. So it's what they're saying is that there's this what's called the reaction range, and we'll learn about this more later. But they're saying that yes, the environment does contribute. However, your genes, which you're given with to work with in the beginning, uh, gives you the range of how you will turn out. Epigenesis is this gene environment interaction or gene behavior interaction. We say it's bidirectional. Genes affect the behavior, which then affects the experience, but then the behavior and the experience could also affect genetic expression. Don't worry about methylation. So, for example, you could have the genetic makeup that makes you open to experience. Like you're inquisitive. You happen to be an individual with a temperament or be a personality trait of curiosity, a willingness to try new things versus resistant. Well, if you are, then that could have a direct impact on what you're going to do, what you're going to try. Let's say you're 15, 16, 17 years old, and your friend says, "Hey, I got a six pack." You're more likely to try that. Well, drinking that alcohol at such a young age is going to have a direct impact on your genes, on the quality of your genes if you continue to do it. So my point is this: by having that curiosity inherited genetically, it has a direct impact on your behavior. Now your behavior leads you to do something that could in turn have a negative impact on your genes. Or you could have like my very responsible daughter, right? She's always eating right, like, but she just likes to. She just likes the taste of like great. Last night she was eating a grapefruit. Like she's like, it's really good, but it's really sour. It's bitter. But she kept eating it. Like, throw some sugar on that. All right, so this is showing you the behavior, genetic expression, environment interaction being bidirectional. The environment has an impact on how we act, and then that has an impact on our genetic expression, but then our genetic expression could have an impact on how we act, which then has an impact on the environment around us that feeds back to our behavior, which and that could have a consequence of changing our genetic expression, on and on and on. Hmm. No. All right, that's it. I'm not going to ask you about the Tutsi genocide. Okay, I'm gonna make one announcement, and then we'll get off. So quiz at 4 p.m. today closes for the rest of the semester Monday at midnight, not Sunday. Monday at midnight. All right, I'm gonna stop recording.